Okay, so Parshas Vayeira. I want to speak about a few different parts of the Parsha today because I think there's really sort of an underlying theme that runs through different parts of this Parsha, and I want to talk about them. I want to start with the yeah, I did. I want to start. Thanks. I want to start with the end of the Parsha, the Akedah, just a little bit. I really want to make this an Akedah shiur, but just one point because as it relates to the rest of the shiur, and that is the Ramban on the Akedah. It's a very just this is Judaism 101, the Ramban on the Akedah. And the Ramban says he talks about the entire purpose of a Nisayan, why we go through different tests, why Hashem makes life so difficult so often. And we find that our life is really sort of like one test after the other. We finish one and it's almost like a little bit of respite, and then we have another test. And this is just, and whatever cycle of life we're in, there's always these challenges and always these different nisyanis that we have to face. And so it's important, I think, for us to just have a proper perspective on when we're confronting those challenges, what the purpose of them is, and that they're not just happenstance or just coincidental or just an unlucky set of circumstances that I'm faced with this unique challenge. Every challenge, and we've spoken about this before, every challenge that we go through in life is tailor made for us. It's part of our journey. And the Ramban says that the purpose of the Nisayan, the purpose of the Akedah for Avram Avinu, and Maisa Avos Siman Labanim, whatever our Avos go through, they pave the way for us. I mean, the fact that Avram Avinu goes through his 10 Nisiyanis, Nesiva Shalom writes, and other Meforshim write as well. This is the path of every single Jew, that every one of us has our 10 Nisiyanis that we all go through in life. And just as Avram Avinu was able to overcome and rise to every occasion and meet every challenge that he faced, this was a Nesinas Koyach. This was a certain empowerment for every Jew afterwards. He paved the way for us. So getting back, so what does the Ramban say? So the entire purpose of the challenge of the Nisayan is not to see whether we have the ability to pass the Nisayan or not, or whether we actually will pass the test or not, or we will rise to the occasion or not. Hashem doesn't need to know that. Hashem already knows whether we'll rise to the occasion or not, or whether we'll pass the Nisayan or not. The entire purpose of the Nisayan is not to see whether we'll pass it or not. The entire purpose is to bring out strengths, inner strengths within us that would have otherwise lied dormant within us and would have never been brought out on their own. You know, human beings are like every other animal in the sense that by nature we take the path of least resistance. So we don't, every one of us is born with innate strengths, abilities, talents. Some of them are surface level, and some of them are much more embedded and much deeper in our psyche and in our makeup and in our souls, etc. So the attributes and the strengths and the talents that we have that are sort of surface level, those come out through our interactions of day-to-day life. But the strengths that we have that are embedded deep within us, that take real effort and real toil to bring out, those strengths will not be brought out on their own. By most of us, again, we take the path of least resistance. So we don't pull out those inner strengths, those inner powers, unless we are forced to. And ultimately, thank you. And ultimately, every challenge that we face in life is meant to do exactly that, is meant to uncover and reveal. There's nothing to do there. Is meant to uncover and reveal these inner strengths and inner challenges that we have. And he says this was the case with Avram Avinu by the Akedah, which is the sort of the framework from which every other Nisayan will follow. Avram Avinu's surface level abilities and surface level strengths was his midas hachesed, was his love, his love for Hashem, his love for mankind. Avram Avinu was a lover. That's who he was. He loved human beings. He was midas hachesed. But in order to reach shlemus, his midas hagavura, which was embedded deep within him, which was not one of his surface level power constraints, in order to reach his shlemus, his wholeness, his perfection, that midas hagavura, that inner strength, needed to be brought to the forefront. And the Akeda was the way that he did it, the way that Hashem brought that out from within him. And so Avram Avinu, who was ready to and almost did shecht his own son, this was bringing out an emunah in Hashem. But after all, Hashem told him, Yitzchak will be your progeny, Yitzchak will be your future, and here it seems like it's contradicting that. And at the same time, bringing out that inner gevura that Avram Avinu had. The point was to bring them to action, to bring them to the surface. And once they were brought to the surface, even though Avram Avinu Bapel in actuality did not shecht his son, he didn't need to. They were already brought to the surface. So the point of every challenge is to take that which lies in potential within us and bring it to action. And that's really, I think, the underlying theme of the entire Parshas Vayeira is the incredible importance of every action that we do. And every challenge that we go through, the Nisayan at the end of the Parsha was to bring out this point, to bring out that the inner strength, that which lies in potential, to bring it out to action. And we see this actually, let's come back to the beginning of the Parsha. The beginning of the Parsha, we have the story where Avram Avinu, this is right after his bris milah, and he's sitting in the tent, he's sitting by the doorway, and he's waiting for guests. But while he's waiting for guests, Hashem reveals himself to him. And he's experiencing Gilui Shechina. He's experiencing a revelation of the divine presence where Hashem comes to him and communicates with him. And yet, when Avram Avinu sees these three Arab wayfarers in the desert, who turn out to be malachim, but he doesn't recognize them as malachim, it's concealed from him that they're angels. They look to him to be three Arab idolaters wandering through the desert. What does Avram Avinu do? In the middle of his nevuah, in the middle of his prophecy, he tells Hashem, hold on, let's stop this conversation. I want to go greet these wayfarers. I mean, why? Why would he stop his nevuah from Hashem? Let him greet the wayfarers later. He's talking to Hashem now. And the answer is, and I saw this a beautiful essay from Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe in his Sefer Shiur Chumash, and he gives a shiur on this Ramban, and he says, this is the point of this whole story. Gilui Shechina, accepting Kabbal's Pnei Shechina, it's Gavaldik, it's amazing. But it's not action. Being machnas eirech, bringing guests in from outside and feeding them and washing their feet and giving them to drink and taking care of them, that's action. And in the end, it's ultimately the action is what's greater. Even greater than Kabbal's Pnei Shechina, even greater than talking to Hashem. As wonderful as that is, and as powerful as that is, and as empowering as that is, what Avram Avinu teaches us in the very first story of this week's Parsha is it's the action that counts, not the potential, or not the spiritual feelings that I may have. My nevuah is, okay, that increases my feelings of spirituality. But all of that, if it doesn't translate into action, into how you treat human beings, I once heard from it says in Pirkei Avos, Makabela Emes Mamisha Amru. So I once heard from Senator Cory Booker. I'm not a great fan of Senator Cory Booker, but I once heard from him such a great line. He was talking about people who are religious. And he said, don't tell me how religious you are. Show me how you treat other human beings. And that will tell me how religious you are. It's such a beautiful line. And that's exactly the opening of Parshas Vayeira. Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina, that's about my religiosity, my connection with Hashem. But if it doesn't translate into action, into recognizing that every human being is a Tzelem Elokim, so I'm not pushing away the divine presence. To the contrary, by bringing in my fellow human being into my home and by feeding them, I'm taking care of the Tzelem Elokim, of the divine presence as it's enclosed in human beings. And that's where ultimately my whole amuna, my religion, my belief system, ultimately it comes to the test. Will it result in action, and how great every action is and how powerful every action is? And that's the very first story of this week's Parsha, telling us that it's the action that matters. Wolpe says, he gives an example. If somebody says, if I would win the lottery, if I had $2 million, I'd give it all to tzedakah. He says, that's not valuable to say that. That's not worthwhile to say. That doesn't accomplish anything. That's easy to do. He said the same person that says, I'd give it all to tzedakah, then goes into a conversation and engages in lashon hara. So it's not the Lev Tov, he says, it's not the good thoughts that matter. It's the action. Do we put it into action? Do we translate our emunah? Do we translate our challenges? Do we translate our faith? Do we translate our religion into how we behave, into our actions? Because that's ultimately what's important. That's literally the very first story in Parshas Vayeira. And then I saw Rabbi Gedalia Shor in the Or Gedaliot. He quotes from the Ostritzer Rebbe. The Ostritzer Rebbe was a great Kabbalist in the end of the 19th century in Poland. And he says that the Ostritzer says, where do these malachim come from? These angels that Avram Avinu sees, that he invites them into their home, the beginning of Parshas Vayeira, he says, where do they come from? Who are these angels? Who are these malachim who are disguised as wayfarers? What brought them here at this moment? And he gives such a fascinating insight, and it's such an important lesson for all of us. It says in Pirkei Avos, that every mitzvah that you do creates a malach, creates a spiritual energy. And he says these three malachim were created by Avram Avinu's mitzvah of bris milah. That by Avram Avinu doing the mitzvah of bris, he created each one of these malachim. And he says, and then he goes into detail, how each malach was created literally according to the action of that mitzvah and manifested that energy. And he explains as follows. He says, in the mitzvah of bris milah, there are actually three different mitzvahs that the moil performs. One is the milah, the removal of the foreskin. The second one is the priya. The priya is after the foreskin is removed, there's a membrane that the moil peels back and reveals the organ that the bris is being done to. And then the third is the metzitza, the drawing out of the blood. He says in each one of these mitzvahs, the milah, the priya, and the metzitza created each one of these malachim. And he explains that midas hadin, the milah is the removal of the foreskin. That's midas hadin. It's the removal of something. It's midas hadin. And so that mitzvah created the Malach Gavriel, who is the Malach of Din, Gevura. Malach Gavriel is Eish, Malach Michael is Maya. He says the mitzvah of Priya, which is the peeling back of the membrane, and that's a mitzvah that reveals the organ that the milah is being done to. That created Malach Michael, because Malach Michael is the Malach of Chesed, the Malach of revelation. And then the mitzvah of metzitza, which is the drawing of the blood. And the Gemara says the reason why we do metzitza, we draw the blood from the place of the milah, is that it helps the healing process begin. That created Malach Raphael. And so each mitzvah created a malach that was literally mida keneged mida. In other words, another way of saying it, another way of expressing it, is that each one of these mitzvahs created an energy that was exactly akin to the mitzvah that was being done. And if you look at, says the Ostritzer, if you look at what these malachim, what their mission was, each one manifested that energy. So, for example, Malach Gavriel, that was created from Midas Hadin, from the mitzvah of Milah, of removing the foreskin, that created Malach Gavriel. And Malach Gavriel came to do what? Destroy Sodom, an act of Gevurah. Malach Michael, that was created by the Priya, but which is the revealing the organ that the meal is done on. So Malach Mochel was created, who is the meat of Chesed, the meat of revelation. What did Malach Mochel come to do? He came to reveal that Yitzchak would be born. So each Malach was an energy that actually manifested the energy of the mitzvah. And then Malach Raphael, that was created by the Metzitza, that was an act of healing. Malach Raphael came to do what? Came to heal Avraham Avinu from his breast and came to save Lot. Those are actions of healing. So, in other words, says the Auschwitz, there's something so powerful that every action that we do, and this is what the whole point of the beginning of Parshas Vayeira is teaching us, the power. We don't realize how profound and how powerful every action that we do is, because we don't see the energy that's created. We don't perceive it with our physical senses. So since we don't perceive it, we don't have the conscious understanding of what we're creating. But this is the message of Vayeira, that every single action that we do creates an energy, and that energy lasts for an eternity. It doesn't just last temporarily. Every positive action, I shouldn't say that. Every positive action we do creates an energy that lasts for an eternity. Negative actions that we do create an energy as well, but they only last for us for our lifetimes. But here's the thing, and this is exactly what Parshas Vayeira is teaching us and what the Ushers are saying. It's not just every action creates an energy, it creates an energy that's exactly akin to that action. So in other words, when you do an act of kindness, an act of chesed, you create a malach that is an energy of chesed. And that energy will be there for you, not just now, not just in this moment, but it'll be here for you 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Not only that, it'll be here for your children and for your grandchildren and for your great-grandchildren. So you create every mitzvah that you do creates an energy that lasts, that and this is exactly what Pirkei Avos is saying. When you do one mitzvah, you create an energy, you create a malach that is there forever. And it is exactly midah keneged midah. So every mitzvah that you do is so incredibly powerful. And I saw this, and I saw this related in another way. And I once brought I once spoke about this in this shiur, and this was several years ago. So I'm going to repeat this story, but it's a story worth repeating. And especially if there's anybody who hasn't heard this story, it's so valuable. And this is a story from that Moshe Feinstein. And now it's important to understand who Moshe Feinstein was. Moshe Feinstein wasn't a Kabbalist, wasn't part of the mystical branch of Judaism. He was a halachist, he was a Talmudist, he was the great basic of the previous generation. And so he wasn't one that was into the sort of mystical elements of Judaism. He was a halachist, a Talmudist, a basic, etc. And Moshe Feinstein, right, he has a compilation of all of his halachic responses in an 8-volume set called Igros Moshe. And in the Hakdama, in the preface to the 8th volume of Igros Moshe, he writes a biography there, a little small biography about himself, or it's recorded there, a biography about himself. And in that biography, he tells a story. And I told this story a few years ago, but it's an incredible story. He tells a story that happened to him as when he was a very young Rav, like in his first position. This was in a town called Luban in Belarusia. Yeah, he was the Rav. And he writes there that as a young man, as a young Rav, one of his congregants was dying, was ill, had an infection, and had a bizarre disease that the doctors could not get under control. And his tongue became infected and swollen, and the infection spread throughout his whole body, and he was dying. This man was dying. And so Rav Moshe, as the Rav, went to visit him, to Bikur Chaylim, went to visit him. And so he records there what happened at this visit. And he says what happened at that visit shook him to his core. And this is what happened. He says as soon as he came into the room, the man asked everybody to leave. He wanted to be alone with Rav Moshe. And it was hard to understand him as he was talking because his tongue was swollen, but Moshe was able to make out the following. That the man told him, he says, I understand why I am dying, and I want to share it with you. He said, and the man tells him the following story. He says, last Shabbos was Parshas Vayeira. Speaks Parsha. And he says, and I spoke at the Shabbos table about, I gave a Dvar Torah, about the daughters of light. And he says that in that Dvar Torah, I spoke about how disgusting and how despicable the daughters of light are. That not only were they intimate with their father, not only did they commit the act of incest with their father, but they, by naming their children Moav, from the father, Ben Ami, son of my nation, son of my people, they literally publicized to the world their incestuous act. And how could it be? So he's telling this to Rabbi Moshe, and I wondered aloud, how could it be that Mashiach could come from this disgusting, despicable act, and these disgusting, despicable people who publicized this act? How could that be the progenitor of Mashiach? Because we know from Moab came Ruth, and from Ruth came Mashiach, came David HaMelech, which came Mashiach. So he says, this was my Dvar Torah, speaking so negatively and disparagingly about the daughters of light. And he said, that night I had a dream. That night, Shabbos night, after Shabbos is over, Saturday night, I had a dream. And in my dream, these two women came to me, older women, and they were veiled. They were black, and they wore black veils over their faces. And they came to me in my dream, and they told me that we are the daughters of Lot. And we came to answer your words denigrating us and speaking so horrifically about us. And they told him the following. And again, he's telling this to Rabbi Moshe. Rabbi Moshe records this in the introduction. He goes, Moshe records the story. And they tell the man the following. They said, we felt that we were obligated. We felt that the destruction of Sodom was the destruction of the whole world. And we felt we were obligated to repopulate the world again with our father, that there was no other way. And the reason why we named our children what we named them is because we had a Ruach HaKodesh, that there would come a time that a religion would be formed based on a claim of immaculate conception, that we conceive, that this person conceived by God. And therefore we wanted, and if we would have claimed, we could have claimed that, because we were known to be relatives of Avram Avinu, and Avram Avinu was known to make miracles. Everybody in the world knew Avram Avinu was a miracle maker, and we were his relatives. And so we could have absolutely gotten away with saying we conceived immaculately, and we would have gotten away with it. Not only would have gotten away with it, we would have been looked at as goddesses. But we wanted to negate that claim in the future. And we wanted to make it known that no human being could be conceived without a father. And therefore, we named our children Moab, from the father, Ben Ami, son of my people. Even though we understood that we may be forever thought of as despicable and disgusting, we did it l'shem shamayim, to negate a future religion that would make that same claim. And then the daughters of Lot, after they explained that to him, they said, you are being punished, mida keneged mida. Since you spoke so negatively about us, your tongue was afflicted. And that's in fact the exact punishment of the Meraglim. If you look at Rashi and the Meraglim, Rashi says, how did the Meraglim die? Because of the Lashon Hara and Eretz Yisrael, their tongues swelled up, and they died from an infection of their tongues. And so says the daughters of Lot to this man, you are being punished, afflicted, mida keneged mida. And after the man tells Rav Moshe that story, he turns away from Rav Moshe, he turns to the wall, and he dies right there on the spot. And Rav Moshe records all of this, and he says he was totally taken aback. He just felt like he just had a meeting with the daughters of Lot from thousands of years ago, who were just conveying to him a message right now. And so all these years we think of the daughters of Lot as being, some kind of, negative people who did this act and publicized it but it's quite to the contrary. So there's so many things to learn from this story. Number one, of course, Dam Lechavschus. But what I take from this story is this man said one Dvar Torah, and just the act of speech and the act of our Torah ended up being resulting in his death. And I think what I take from the story, besides the fact that what we take about the daughters of Lot and how incredible they were, and their self-sacrifice and their Mesiras Nefesh, L'Shem Shemayim, but the power of our spoken word, the power of our every action. That's really the underlying theme of this parsha. The power of every action, the power of every word. Our words contain incredible power. Here, this man said one Dvar Torah, and it resulted ultimately in his death because of how powerful his words are, the energies that his words created. So just like by Avram Avinu's bris, he created these three malachim, and they ultimately manifested exactly the energy that they were created from. Midas Hadin manifested Midas Hadin, the destruction of Sodom. Midas HaChesed manifested the news that Yitzchak would be born. Midas HaRafua manifested the healing of Avram and the saving of Lot. This man spoke negatively, Mida Keneged Mida. Everything that we do, and this is the message of the very first Jew in the beginning of his story, everything that we do comes back to us. Comes back to us, comes back to our families, comes back to our children, comes back to our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. I told a story about my own family. I look at my own life, and I grew up in a very, very secular home, right? I mean, like as secular as you could possibly get. And not just me, my cousins, my whole generation were as far, like my grandparents weren't religious, my parents weren't. And by the time it got to our generation, like Judaism was the end of that was the end. Like, well, I remember thinking, my mother always used to tell me, you have to marry a Jew, you have to marry a Jew. And I remember thinking, why? I would not think, I would tell my mom, why? Right? I mean, my mom's here on the Zoom, so she could testify. I would say, why? I don't particularly like Jews, the ones that why should I marry them? Just because I happen to be born into this religion? Like, that's what I felt like. And yet, through some unknown force, I became religious. My younger brother became religious. I have a first cousin that became religious. Between the three of us, we have, I don't know how many children and how many grandchildren now. There's going to be hundreds and hundreds of great-grandchildren from my great-grandparents where Judaism was completely cut off. How did that happen? How did that happen? All three not related to each other. How I became religious, how my younger brother became religious, how my first cousin became religious. How did that happen? There's no question in my mind that somebody back there in my family tree sacrificed for Yiddishkeit, was Meser Nefesh for Yiddishkeit, and that created an energy that just as Yiddishkeit was departing from our family tree, it was literally brought back with a vengeance. It was such a force. There's no question. Everything that we do, every action that we do creates an energy that always comes back to us. That's the lesson of Rav bris. That's why he stopped Kabbalah's B'nai Shechina to greet these wayfarers. Every action we do is powerful, and we sort of tend to have like an all or nothing sort of feeling. If I don't do everything, then what does one little action matter? And this is what the Rebbe taught when he came out with the Tefillin campaign. And the rest of the Orthodox world was so against. I mean, now everybody believes in it, but the rest of the Orthodox world at the time the Rebbe came out with the Tefillin campaign was so against it. What are you accomplishing by putting on Tefillin with a Jew on a corner of Manhattan? He didn't put on Tefillin yesterday. He won't put it on again tomorrow. So what are you accomplishing? You know what you're accomplishing? Infinity. We can't even grasp what we're accomplishing. And we have to realize this in our own lives as well, not to have that all or nothing. If I don't say the whole book of Tehillim, what is the point of saying one Tehillim? Right? If I don't go to minyan every day, what's the point of going today? And that's not true. And we shouldn't have that feeling. Every action that we do creates an energy, and we have no idea how that energy will reverberate back to us. I mean, one thing I've seen in 30 years as a rabbi, and one of my greatest blessings as a rabbi is just to see to have my eyes open to the lives of so many other lives and so many other families and so many other people. And one thing I have seen this over and over and over again, that what you put out into the world always comes back to you, always comes back to you in one form or another. And this is exactly what, as Avram Avinu put out into the world his bris milah, and literally it brought back to him gevura, chesed, refuah, exactly the mitzvahs of the bris milah. And one more thing that I want to end on, and that is because it's the same lesson again in another area of the parsha where Avram Avinu davens for Sodom. And it seems like, and his davening wasn't answered, right? It seemed like it failed, right? And so I was just speaking with somebody who's going through a very difficult time, and he said he told me this line, and I've heard this line before that we always daven to Hashem, and sometimes Hashem's answer is no, and that's what it seemed like by Avram Avinu. And I would phrase that a little bit differently. It's not that sometimes Hashem's answer is no. I don't think that's accurate. I think what I would say is more accurate and what we actually see from the story of Avram and Sodom is that if you'll notice, after the Sodom story is over, right? Avram Avinu davens. His davening is unsuccessful. Hashem destroys Sodom. And then it says, V'yashkem Avram b'Baker, that Avram goes and wakes up in the morning and he stands in that same place and he davens again. And from there, our Chazal say that Avram Avinu, that's where we see Avram Avinu instituted Shacharis, that he davened again in the morning after the destruction of Sodom. And it seems to be bizarre. Like, why would they say Shacharis is instituted in the place where his tefillah was rejected? Right? His tefillah was rejected from his tefillah for Sodom. So why would that be where he starts Shacharis? And the answer is his tefillah wasn't rejected at all. In fact, his tefillah was very successful. It just wasn't successful in the way that Avram Avinu envisioned it. And this is the lesson of the story. The Megala Amukais, who's also one of the ancient Kabbalists, so the Megala Amukais says that the people of Sodom were reincarnated as the Yidden in the times of Mitzrayim. And we know that the whole story of Mitzrayim, the whole Galus Mitzrayim, was to refine Klal Yisrael, so that we would be able to be a refined nation, to be able to. We went through that Kur HaBarzel, if you will, where the Kur HaBarzel is where all the impurities are taken out of the metal, and the metal is refined. The Kur HaBarzel of Mitzrayim served to refine Klal Yisrael, so that we'll be at a spiritual state to have Kabbalah Satorah. So says the Megala Amukais that the people of Sodom were reincarnated as Klal Yisrael Mitzrayim. What gave them the koyach to be refined was Avram Avinu's tefillah. Avram Avinu's tefillah, says the Megala Amukais, for the people of Sodom was incredibly effective. It didn't save them at that moment. It wasn't that Hashem's answer was no. It was that Hashem desired that tefillah because our tefillahs are incredibly powerful. Hashem partnered with us to make our tefillahs incredibly powerful. So Hashem often puts us in certain situations, eliciting our davening, so that our davening will bring about the Yeshua, either the Yeshua now or the Yeshua for another person at another time in another place, whenever it will be. Every tefillah is answered, and every tefillah is effective. And this is why it's dafka there, where Avraham Avinu was instituted chakras, to teach us that what sometimes seems to be a rejected tefillah is never rejected. In fact, the Reb Tzadok of Lublin, the great Reb Tzadok of Lublin, Reb Tzadok Cohen Rabinowitz, says that it was Avraham Avinu that embedded in the city of Sodom was the neshama of David HaMelech, right, within Lot, right? David HaMelech comes from Rus, who comes from Moab, who comes from Lot. So embedded in the city of Sodom was the neshama of David HaMelech. And Avram Avinu's tefillah is what empowered the extraction of David HaMelech's neshama, so that David HaMelech would ultimately be able to result from Lot. That also came from Avram Avinu's tefillah. So far from being a rejected tefillah, what seemingly was a rejected tefillah, far from being a rejected tefillah, Avram Avinu's davening for the people of Sodom resulted in the elevation of Klal Yisrael at the times of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and resulted in the ultimate extraction from Sodom of the neshama of David HaMelech and the neshama of Mashiach, who will come from David HaMelech. So it teaches us again the same lesson that we learned about the Bris Milah, the same lesson that we learned from the story of Reb Moshe. And this is the theme across Vayeira, the incredible power of every action that we do So when we daven for somebody who's sick and we don't get the answer that we wanted, we should recognize and realize we didn't get the answer we wanted, but that tefillah was not wasted and was not rejected. To the contrary, the more heartfelt the tefillah is, the more power that tefillah has. And in every mitzvah that we do, we may not see with our physical senses the spiritual energy that we create, but we need to recognize and realize that if let's say I have 5 minutes now before I have to go somewhere. What's the point of sitting down and learning something? It's only for 5 minutes. I'm not going to be able to learn a whole topic. It's only for 5 minutes. That 5 minutes that you sit and learn, that you utilize, or the tale that you say in the waiting room at the doctor, whatever it may be, you say, what's the point of doing it? I only have a few minutes. Every mitzvah that you do, every action that you do creates an incredibly powerful energy. And that energy will be there for you, for your children, for your children's children, for an eternity. And that's the message of Parshas Vayeira. And so every one of us needs to recognize and realize, like the person that spoke negatively about Lot's daughters, like the story of the mitzvah, the power of the mitzvah of Milah of Avram Avinu creating the three malachim. The every mitzvah, the story of the tefillah of Avram Avinu and what it ultimately brought about to the world. The message of Vayeira is every action we do is powerful. And we shouldn't negate it, and we shouldn't denigrate it. We should, in fact, if we have 2 minutes to take Pitul Tilim, to do a mitzvah, everything that we do brings incredible power and brachas to our lives, and it works the negative as well. Every negative action that we do. So it's important that the learning that we do and the Yiddishkeit that we live ultimately results in what the bottom line is, and that's action. And when it results in action, that action is there for all of us and for all of Klal Yisrael. So Amir Hashem, every one of us will take the lesson of Parshas Vayeira, will increase in our bottom lines and bring our chesed and our love and our unity and our achdus to the world. That will create an energy which Hashem will respond to in kind and bring us the ultimate of ava and achdus, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, b'mheira v'yimenu, amen. So let's just conclude with the Tilim 121. Okay, let's do Tilim 121 on behalf of Klal Yisrael, of Eretz Yisrael, of our soldiers, of our hostages. Okay, Tilim 121 together. Everybody has it pulled up. Shir Lamaloi Seseinai Hari Miyayin Yavoy Ezri mi marinoi ois shemayim v'yaretz ayitin v'yiraklech al in eliyam l'yishan shem Yisrael marinoi shem rachnetzach hayad minecha yom Hashem shleikach v'yireach v'laylo Adonai yishmar mikara yishmeres nafshecha Adonai yishmer tzeis v'yachol mi'ata v'yadei lam. Thank you so much, everybody. Amir Hashem will join you next week.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Wonderful as usual.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
What if you have really question? Like I was talking last Shabbat, but sitting my husband, I was complaining about why Abraham Avinu actually blessed Ishmael and asked Hashem to save Ishmael, and now we have all this problem.
Yeah, but that's not the same. That's not the same as.
I feel like a little bit of why Abraham Avinu that. Like
angry. Yeah, but that's not the but that's fine. That's a good question, and that's a fair question. But that's not the same as